Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our lecture series on the 1920s, and we're going to start to talk about the Harding and Coolidge administrations and kind of set up the next, kind of major domestic event in the United States, which will be the Great Depression. First we got to talk about Warren G. Harding. Harding's administration is going to be known for a couple of things. First, he's going to really be dealing with the kind of ramifications of World War One. Right, Europe's a hot mess. America's transitioning its economy again and is now a major player on the world stage. America hasn't had that role before, so he's got to try and figure out what kind of leadership role America is going to play in the world. And it's going to be known for corruption. His administration is one of the most corrupt of all times. As a matter of fact, a lot of people say it's so corrupt that the major scandal, the Teapot Dome scandal, killed him. He had a heart attack shortly afterwards, and I think because he felt betrayed. So the idea of everything behind the Harding administration is the idea of a return to normalcy. He wants, we just fought World War One. We had all of this, just upheaval domestically, changing the way our economy is running, our young men fighting overseas. And so he talks about returning America back to the pre-World War One time period. He also wants to bring the United States back to, its isolationist roots, right? The Monroe Doctrine that we had discussed first semester, really was, we're going to stay out of European affairs. He wants to turn back to that. The reality is, and nobody at this time period really understands this yet, but that's impossible. The Monroe Doctrine worked when we were a young nation and when there were other superpowers in the world kind of trying to instill order in the world. We're going to want to go back to that, but we just can't. The economy, because of industrialization, we're all too interconnected now. We can't just stay at home and kind of ignore the rest of the world because of industrialization, we make more stuff than we can buy ourselves, which means if we're all going to keep our jobs, we have to sell to other countries. If we have to sell to other countries, that means we need stability in those other countries. We need their economies to do well as well. The richer other countries are, the more they can buy our stuff. And so we have this kind of vested interest in the rest of the world that, in the 1920s and during the Harding administration, he can't grasp that because it's too new. So one of the things that is going to play a major role in the Harding administration is going to be foreign policy. It used to be Great Britain kind of dominated the world, and they were the ones that brought stability and order, sometimes for good and sometimes for not good, no doubt about it. But Great Britain after World War One is really too weak to do that. Their economy is struggling. The German economy is even worse. The German economy used to be one of the best in the world. And so Europe's just a hot mess right now. And they're our biggest trading partner. And so we need to make sure that things start to normalize in Europe. Europe is in a ton of debt. And it's interesting, and this is important. Germany, because of the Treaty of Versailles in World War One, they have to pay war reparations to Great Britain and France. So Germany is in debt to Great Britain and France. Well, Great Britain and France, to be able to fight Germany during World War One, had to borrow money from America. So Germany owes money to Great Britain and France. Great Britain and France owes money to America. America doesn't really owe any money to anybody. We actually made money during World War One because everybody was kind of buying our stuff. So we have some money. So it's important that you understand who owes who what and who's got the money and who doesn't. Germany, Great Britain, and France don't have money. They all owe it to each other, kind of. And then America does have money and is owed money by Great Britain and France. So, because of that, most of the allied nations feel like the U.S. should kind of bear the burden of that debt. They think that because we actually made money off the war, we're in the best place financially, even though the wheels are about to fall off that bus. We're about to have the Great Depression. So even though our economy looks good, it's really not. We've kind of talked about that in previous lectures. And because immediately after World War I, we started to place high tariffs on things, on European goods. And remember what a tariff is. It's a tax on imported goods. That was a huge mistake, by the way. We thought if we placed tariffs on European goods that, Americans would buy more American. And although that's true, tariffs, do make foreign goods more expensive, which does make Americans tend to buy more American. The problem is, like I said in the beginning of the lecture, we make more stuff than we can just sell to ourselves. So we need Europe to buy our goods. Well, if we put a tariff on their goods, they put a tariff on our goods. So there's this price war, which makes our stuff more expensive in Europe. But also, it makes the European economy weaker. And if their economy is weak, guess whose stuff they can't afford to buy? If you guessed America, you'd be right. So Europe kind of blames all that on us and says that we should take the brunt of this debt crisis after World War I. And so what ends up being established is what is known as the Dawes Plan. And this is just like some economic trickery. It's like an accounting trick, really, that does work out initially. So, there are a few years where this actually works. It works all the way up until the Great Depression. And we'll talk about why it stops working at the Great Depression. But the Dawes Plan essentially says, look, Great Britain and France can't pay back America unless Germany pays back Great Britain and France. And Germany doesn't have any money whatsoever. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the World War II unit. Not only are they in debt, they've had all their resources stolen by Great Britain and France. So they don't have any cash to pay back this debt. So Germany needs cash. Well, who did we say had cash? America. And so essentially what's going to happen is America is going to loan money to Germany. Germany's going to take that money and it's going to pay back Great Britain and France. And then guess what Great Britain and France are going to do with that money? They're going to pay back America. And so we're essentially just passing money around in a triangle. Now, that helps Germany because they get to pay off their debt. It helps Great Britain and France because they get to pay off their debt as well with Germany's money. And America doesn't. It's kind of neutral to America because we're getting our own money back at the end. Now, that only works though as long as America continues to have money to essentially loan to Germany. And so, eventually Germany would have to pay it back. So America, we would get our money back. But, it would be over time to help Germany get back on their feet. So, this whole scheme works for several years. But then the Great Depression happens. And when the Great Depression happens, guess who runs out of money? That would be America. And so when America runs out of money, then Germany can't pay back Great Britain and France. And when Germany can't pay back Great Britain and France need the money. Guess what they do? They invade German territory to steal resources. And that is going to just be devastating to Germany, so economically devastating to Germany that they're essentially willing to turn to any strong leader that will be willing to, stand up to Great Britain and France to stop this robbery. Guess who that leader is going to be? Ding, 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 Hitler. Right. So this is kind of what it looks like, right? America will loan money to Germany. Germany will take that money to pay back the Allies, Great Britain and France. Great Britain and France would take that money and send it back to America to pay back the United States. Now, eventually, America would get the money from Great Britain and France, and then eventually Germany would have to pay back the loans that we gave them. But the idea is that America will give Germany time because we don't really need the money. That is until the Great Depression happens. And so this whole scheme essentially will eventually fall apart because of the Great Depression. That's kind of the Harding administration's foreign policy. Domestically, what you got to understand is he is just racked by corruption. I think the biggest scandal is going to be the Teapot Dome scandal. And so the Teapot Dome scandal is the Teapot Dome is an area in Wyoming that the American government owns, right? And we own it because it's got oil. And so we're taking the oil out of that land and using it to fuel our Navy. Well, the Secretary of the Interior, which is one of the president's advisors, convinces the government to sell that land, essentially lease it, really, lease that land to one of his friend's companies. And he's like, oh, he spins it like, hey, we're going to lease it to them and we'll make money off the lease. Well, then the Secretary of the Interior is leasing it to a friend of his. His friend, once he controls that land, he's getting a super sweet deal on that land, takes the land, takes the oil from the land, and then guess what he does with it? He sells it back to the American government for huge profits. Well, clearly that's shady, right? And the taxpayer is bearing the brunt of that. Eventually, the American people find out about it. This is just absolutely devastating. This should never, ever happen. It's a violation of trust. And so, this just rocks the Harding administration. And, it's that administration's essentially never going to be able to recover from it. Harding's not really going to be able to recover from it. He'll die of a heart attack shortly after the scandal breaks. So it's absolutely devastating. Now, the Teapot Dome scandal is the most famous of the scandals during the Harding administration, but his administration is filled with a bunch of just essentially criminals. And so so much so that they're referred to as the Ohio Gang. And so you can we're not going to talk about these guys individually, but just so you can kind of see, the list of people that are, resign, end up going to jail, or commit suicide because they get caught up in scandals during the Harding administration. So take a look at the list here. So we got resigned, jail, 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 right? Suicide, mental institution, right? There's scandals just rampant. And so that ends up kind of dominating his Harding's domestic policy and is going to cause kind of a rejection of the Harding administration. So because of all that, America is looking for the next president to be the kind of quiet, reassuring figure, right? We're sick of all the corruption. And so the American government or the American people will turn to Calvin Coolidge, or Silent Cal. This is a guy who's known for being, kind of honest and having, a sense of integrity, for being a moral character, right? It's just a rejection of the Harding administration. And so, the American people just believe this is going to be the guy that's going to kind of clear up all of that corruption, most notably the Teapot Dome scandal. Coolidge administration is a rejection of the Democratic Party, right? The Democratic Party at this point in history is a mess. Coolidge is a Republican. And so, they're rejecting essentially. The Democratic Party is in the 1920s. It's the party of prohibition. And from our previous lecture of prohibition, that the American people are rejecting prohibition. Initially they kind of embraced it, but it's become a hot mess. It's increased crime. It's increased the stature and reach of the mafia, and it's just been this kind of nightmare situation. And we also see that the Democratic Party is the party that created the KKK, and is in the 1920s we're seeing a rise of the KKK, a more politically active branch of the KKK that's being led by Southern Democrats, and so the KKK is hosting marches in Washington. They're burning crosses all across the South. They're using essentially domestic terrorism to intimidate blacks primarily in the South. The Republican Party was the party of Reconstruction. They were, the first African American politicians were almost exclusively Republicans, and so the Southern Democrats reacted against that by, really empowering the KKK, and so there's this reaction against Democrats because of the KKK, and then the labor unions are democratic institutions, and like we had talked about in previous lectures, the labor unions are being billed as communist bastions. Now we know that that's not the case, right? We talked about that at length before. This is, you can, in the 1920s, you can blame Democrats for prohibition. It's not complete prohibition. It's not completely their fault. But they were, the major supporters of it. There's no doubt about it that the KKK is a Southern Democratic institution, and so you can blame Democrats in the 1920s for that. But this idea that labor is somehow infiltrated by communists and they're trying to overthrow the system. That's a fear that people have in the 1920s, but probably not a justifiable one. But nevertheless, people turn to Calvin Coolidge because of all those things. And so here are pictures of kind of the rise of, so KKK kind of goes through spurts where it's powerful and not powerful. So immediately in the 1860s, we're going to see, the rise of the KKK as this domestic terror organization. Then it kind of dies away. And then it reemerges in the 1920s, but it's more political. They're still lynching African Americans. They're still committing acts of terror, but they're also like kind of trying to become more mainstream by hosting political rallies and things like that. And then we'll see in the 1960s again, as a reaction to the civil rights movement, the KKK will kind of rise again, and we'll talk about that more in the civil rights unit. Prohibition clearly has made Democrats unpopular. So the Coolidge years, what did Coolidge do? Well, first of all, it's foreign policy. Again, even though we have this idea that we want to return to isolationism, we're still going to be an actor on the national stage, but it's going to be designed, the whole effort there is to stay out of and avoid any future wars or conflicts, primarily in Europe, but anywhere else around the world too. And so one of the ways that they're going to try and do that is kind of, I think just ridiculous. And that's going to be with the Kellogg-Briand Pact. The Kellogg-Briand Pact is, it's not that it's a good idea, because it's not. It's kind of a dumb idea, but it's a good gesture. And the Kellogg-Briand Pact is essentially, it's an international pact where, all these nations are going to come together and they're going to sign this, essentially this international agreement to outlaw war. So the sentiment is good, right? Hey, let's end war, right? Excellent. But when you outlaw war, that's kind of ridiculous because what's the enforcement mechanism? Yeah, right. War. And so, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But at the time, essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to send a signal to the world that the most powerful economic nations in the world, the most powerful military countries in the world have decided that we're not going to fight any more wars. So great gesture. It's symbolically important, but it has no teeth. It's not enforceable. And when Hitler rises to power and we get World War II, he knows the weakness in the Kellogg-Briand Pact. So are we going to outlaw future wars? Clearly not. World War I does have a sequel. So, just this kind of idealistic gesture. It's mostly symbolic. Right. And then the Coolidge years are also, when it comes to foreign policy, are going to be very active in Latin America, which is, we're we're going to involve ourselves in all kinds of different countries in Central and South America to the point, and we're going to intervene in domestic politics in Central and South America in ways that are not always great. We're going to do for a number of reasons. One, to try and keep communism out of our hemisphere. That's going to be part of it. But mostly it's to secure our economic interests. And in doing that, we're going to support some people that aren't good people, right? And so these interventions in Latin America are still to this day cause animosities in Latin American countries. We like to think we have good relationships with all the Central and South American countries, but the reality is we don't. Some of them we do, for sure, no doubt about it. But a lot of them, there's still some resentment from these, from the times that we've intervened. And so, it's going to cause some resentments. I'm going to show you a map here in just a second of all the different interventions. And this is, as a country that, in we always have to talk about the pros and cons of American history, and there's no doubt about it. We have promoted democracy around the world, and we have freed millions and millions of people from dictatorships and despots from all around the world. We've increased the standard of living and lifted more people out of poverty than any other superpower in history. There's no doubt about that. That's all great, but we've also done some shady stuff. We talked about Hawaii earlier. And this Latin America, look at all these different interventions. Sometimes it was with the support of the people, but most of the time it wasn't. And so, this is kind of examples of, when America went too far. Now, to be fair, every country has done stuff like this. America is not, the only country to, be expansionist. Every civilization at some point or another has, been a conqueror. So, it happens. We don't actually technically conquer these countries, but, pseudo. So, this is going to cause problems for us even today. A lot of these countries are going to be upset with us. Domestically, we see that society is becoming more and more materialistic. That's good and bad, right? We're making more money, and there's availability of money out there. We've got African Americans have moved north, gotten better jobs. They're getting more money. They're spending more money, buying more things. That's good for the overall economy. White Northerners are coming back from the war. They've got money in their pockets. They're spending it because of industrialization. Products are cheaper. So things like home radios are becoming more common. Automobiles are becoming more common for people to buy. But the downside to this is the availability of credit. So, it used to be you just wanted to buy something, you had to have the cash for it. And if you didn't, you had to say you just didn't get the thing. Well, credit becomes more available during the 1920s, and people don't know how to use it. I would argue that today, people still don't know how to use credit responsibly. Most people don't. And so that's going to be a big issue later on because, if you're in debt during a good economy, it doesn't really matter much because you're able to, you're still getting your paycheck. You can pay that stuff off, and hopefully eventually you'll get out from under that debt, even though a lot of people don't. But when the economy turns south and you lose your job, your debt doesn't go with it. And so, when the Great Depression hits and people are in all this debt, they lose their job and they still owe that money. And that's going to be pretty devastating. We're seeing, the rise of materialism is going to be, a lot of the reason for that is going to be because of, the growth in wages, but also leisure time. Unions have got huge victories for workers. We're talking 5-day work weeks, so you get the weekend off. Well, we all know, when do you spend money? Like I never, Monday through Friday, I never spend any, or Monday through Thursday, I should say, Sunday through Thursday. No, Monday through Thursday, I spend no money because I'm at work all day. When I get home, I eat, and then I'm like on the couch and I'm tired, right? When do you spend all your money? Friday night, during the day on Saturday, Saturday night, and brunch on Sunday morning. Like that's where your money goes. And so the more time, if you're working, when I was in college, I went to school all day. I worked all night. I worked on the weekends. I never spent money. And so staying busy keeps you from spending money. Well, we all agree, 6 12-hour days is just not healthy. And so we've won that victory, but it also means that, there are some unintended consequences, which means, spending more money. Spending is increasing in this time. That's should be a good thing because that stimulates the economy. But because of demand is, even though we're spending more in the 1920s, demand's actually decreasing because we're not selling as much stuff to Europe. Spending more money as demand is decreasing ends up being actually a bad thing. And then stock speculation, and that's essentially buying stock on credit. We'll talk about that more later. That's devastating for the economy as well. We see the automobile becoming more affordable. We talked about this in the industrialization unit. So if you are interested in that, you can go back and watch that lecture, Henry Ford. Right. It's getting to the point where if you get into the middle class, you could start to afford a car, which, great. I mean, that's going to change America in a huge way. Right. We're still in a kind of, it's not laissez-faire, it's a pseudo laissez-faire. We're starting to regulate the economy, but most people still kind of think that regulation should be very few and far between. That'll be the case all the way up until the Great Depression. The Great Depression is going to be such a serious economic event that most people will start to believe that government regulation is a good thing. But, in the Coolidge years, most people still think, laissez-faire, hands off, the government shouldn't be regulating businesses. Farmers are going to be struggling during this time period. We've talked about that a little bit before. Farmers made bank during World War I, so much so that, during World War I, we fed not just America, we fed Great Britain and France as well. The soldiers in Great Britain and France, the men in Great Britain and France all became soldiers. And so there's nobody at home farming, and they needed to be fed. And so Americans essentially fed them. And so the government essentially, and just market forces went to farmers and said, we need you to farm more. Well, you can't just farm more, right? You got to have more to farm more. You got to have more land and you have to have more machinery, and all of that's expensive. And so farmers said, hey, look, if you're willing to buy it, we'll buy more land. If you're going to buy our crops, we'll buy more machines and we'll meet that demand and we'll make buku bucks. Yay. But then when the war ends, the British and French soldiers go back to farming. When they go back to farming, they buy less of our stuff, which means less money for the American farmer. But now they're in debt because they haven't made enough to pay off the land and the machines. And so all of a sudden now there's really not anybody to sell crops to. And they have all this debt. They're in trouble. And so guess what they do? They decide to farm more. That's the exact wrong thing to do, because the more that they farm, the more they produce, the lower prices go, right? I mean, that's supply and demand. If there's more of something, it costs less. And so to try and pay off their debts, they're just going to farm more and more and more and more. Prices are going to drop lower and lower and lower and lower until essentially the bottom falls out. And so this is going to be disastrous for American farmers. So overproduction after World War I forces prices to decline, and prices are declining at the absolute worst time because farmers are in more debt than they had ever been. And so absolutely devastating. And then America's going to try and step in. The American government's going to try and step in and save the day with the McNary-Hagan bill. This again is bad. The bill actually is going to try and buy up surplus crops from farmers. That's bad because it makes farmers farm more, which has prices drop even lower. We're not going to figure this out until FDR comes along. FDR will come along and realize that if we want to fix things for farmers, what we actually have to do to get prices to stabilize is pay farmers not to farm. That sounds weird, but if we pay them not to farm in the short term, there'll be less crops out there to sell, which means prices will go up and the system will stabilize. So that will be good for farmers. Now, there'll be Americans that are starving at the same time as we're paying people not to farm, and so there's a moral question there. But stabilizing the economy is important, and it's important for everybody. So when we talked about debt before, the availability of debt, you can see in the chart here, debt in America is dramatically rising leading up to the Great Depression, which is not good. You don't want to be in debt when the economy sours, because then you owe people money and you don't have a job. And so then they'll come in and they'll take all your possessions, your house, your car, and then, what do you do then? So debt is dangerous for all of you listening. Debt is dangerous. Stay away from it as much as you possibly can. Right. And then the other thing we wanted to talk about during the Coolidge administration is the ability for people to buy stock on the margin. I told you we'd talk about that later. Buying stock on the margin means you buy stock on credit, essentially. And so a couple things we have to talk about first, and we're going to try and do this quickly. The buying stock, first of all, you have to understand what stock is. You're buying a percentage of the company. And so the idea is you buy good companies and you buy a percentage of that company. And as that company does better, the price of that stock goes up. And, so if I buy, let's say Apple stock, decades ago for $10 a share. Each share is a part of that company. Apple then comes out with the iPhone. Everybody buys one. The stock price, because the company's doing well, the stock price goes up, and say it goes from $10 to $50. Guess what? I have made $40, and so that's great. And so people are starting to realize stock market is a great way to make money. And for all of you listening, it is, if you do it responsibly. I mean, most of the people listening to this video are under 20 years old. If you take, this is an amazing statistic, and this is what the stock market can do for you. If you take $95 a month and invest it in the stock market when you're 20 years of age or younger, and if you do that your whole life, you'll retire a millionaire. $95 a month, all right? That's amazing. And so everybody wants to get in on the stock market. And so what the stockbrokers come up with is an idea in the 1920s to help people get involved, and that's buying on the margin. It works like this. So if you take a look here, on the chart, it'd be my far left here, when you're looking at the chart, the stock that's being purchased is $1,000 per share. Now, the average person doesn't have $1,000 to buy to buy a share of this stock. So what the stockbroker allows the purchaser to do is to buy it on the margin, which means the purchaser puts down $100. The broker covers the other $900. Right. So, you owe the broker $900. And the idea is that if the stock price goes up, and so in the example here, the middle bar, say 6 months later, the price of the stock goes up to $1,500, right? I paid $100 for the $1,000 stock. I sell it at a profit for $1,500. I give the broker back his $900, and I made off of my $100 a profit of $500. That's great. That's great. And so people are doing this left and right, and they think it's this like gimmick, this like get rich quick scheme. And so people are dumping all of their spare money in the stock market, and they're buying stock on the margin, and that's great as long as what happens? As long as the price of the stock keeps going up, right? But we know that that doesn't always happen. And so, if the stock market crashes or has a downturn, and I bought I bought a share of stock, $1,000 stock for $100, and I owe the broker 900, and the price goes down. All of a sudden now, so say that $1,000 share goes down to 500. All of a sudden now, I sell that, I got to pay my broker back. I'm going to my hundred. Not only do I lose my $100, I'm in debt $500. And so that is absolutely awful. You don't ever want to be in that situation. And so, all these Americans are dumping all their money into the stock market, thinking it's always going to go up. But we know business demand has gone down. So these businesses are essentially, going to start to fail left and right. When that happens, their stock prices go down. And not only do Americans lose their entire life savings, they end up being in even more debt. And so that's what makes the Great Depression so awful, is people don't just lose their jobs. They lose their jobs, and they're in debt. And so they literally, not only do they have nothing, right? Nothing is, when you have nothing, at least you're neutral, right? These people aren't neutral, right? They have less than nothing because they're in debt. And so this is an absolutely awful way to invest. You should never, use credit to invest. You should only invest with money that you are comfortable potentially losing. And so, we learn a really important lesson here. All right. That's where we're going to leave off for the day. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I will see you again shortly.